Okay, we're going to call the April 4, 2017 Building Appeals Board meeting for the City of Ojai to order. How about a Pledge of Allegiance led by... Oh, excuse me, you're right. In that case, roll call. Who's going to call it?
Member Daddy?
Here.
Member Murphy?
Here.
Chair Ulrich?
Here.
And myself, Dale Hanson.
Okay, on that note, since you've been so officious, Ms. Murphy, would you lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Public communications is the time set aside during the Building Appeals Board meeting for members of the public to address the Building Appeals Board on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the board and will generally be referred to staff and are placed on a subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than for emergency items, no action on non-agendized items can be taken at this meeting. There does not appear to be anyone in the public seeking to make public communications, unless someone suddenly walks through the door. We'll move on to the consent items. All matters listed on the consent calendar are to be considered routine by the governing bodies and will be enacted by one motion in the form listed. There will be no discussion of these items unless before the governing body votes on the motion to adopt. Specific items are removed from the consent calendar for separate motions. Do we have any motions regarding any removal or modification to the single consent item, the minutes of the Building Appeals Board meeting of February 21, 2017?
I move we accept them. I wrote them, I'm sure.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, in that case then, roll call.
We did.
We did, we're good. Okay, so next we have item 2. According to we have an administrative report dated 28 March for this meeting. Subject proposed code amendments to the 2016 California Building Codes. The administrative report is generated by the building official, and the recommendation is review and discuss recommended amendments to the California Building Codes. So at this point, I will...
Chair Ulrich?
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I'd like to know, well, I believe everything in the minutes is accurate, and they're all fine, and I'm happy. There was a number of things that we discussed, and I would like to ask a question or two as to an update as to what some of the items were from the last meeting.
Yes.
Just seems like for some reason in this community, we get dysphagia and just kind of,
Okay.
16 years later, we're doing the blower ordinance. We had a discussion with our building official, and there was a few questions that were asked.
Well, while you determine those, can I...
Sure.
Let me read the text here that precedes this so that
Sure.
anyone who might be watching or interested from a subsequent perspective is, although the state requires the enforcement of certain standards, it allows the city to amend these standards in order to address local concerns. The state does, however, limit the city's ability to amend the prescribed building standards to amendments which are reasonably necessary. And I'd like to underline that, for reasons relating to local climate, geology, and topography. The proposed amendments to the code, which include foundation upgrades and high fire hazard areas. And there was a missing word, but I believe it should be the proposed amendments to the code include foundation upgrades and higher fire hazard areas. The state mandated standards went into effect by state mandate 1 January 2017. The building standards adopted are contained in, and this is the building standards adopted by the state on and made effective on 1 January 2017 are contained within the California Building Code 2016, California Residential Code 2016, California Plumbing Code 2016, California Mechanical Code 2016, California Electrical Code, California Administrative Code, California Energy Code, and California Reference Standards Code, all 2016. Member Daddy?
Now I have two questions. On agenda item 3, I believe, and the pages are not numbered, so it's about 5 or 6 pages in. It's the end of the minutes, it's the last page, and it's got the minutes by Dale Hansen, so you'll see that in the first section. It's maybe page 5 or 6. And it's above agenda item 4. It says, member farmer asked how many applications there were for non-conforming second units. It was answered there were 45. 31 were legalized out of the 45. 5 were issued a permit, and they are pending. 1 is approved and waiting for pickup, and 8 still being reviewed. Would you happen to have any update on where we are on those items at this time?
No, I do not have an update.
Okay. Chair Ulrich, when we have our next agenda meeting, could you ask if that's added to the agenda so we can just kind of, figure out where we are in this flow?
Okay, so from a practical perspective, for the record, we're requesting that staff provide an update to the current status of non-conforming second units, starting with approved. And I don't know what the distinction between approved and legalized is. I also don't understand what 5 were issued a permit and are pending. In other words, they're still in process of completing whatever the requirements are, I would presume. And then 8 are still being reviewed. So we are looking at a status update as to whether the 45 is increased and what are the status of the original 45. And very good. And also, I'd asked the question somewhere in the course of things regarding the processing time. And in these minutes, Mr. McClary, the city manager, indicated that the city needed approximately 120 days to act from the completed application. That presumes 4 months to complete. So I'd asked the question about where we were from a performance metric on the current outstanding applications. Where are they as far as durations?
And you can ask as another part of the metric, since the second unit conforming has, the program has expired, whatever you'd like to say, where we are in regards to that, and if in fact the 3 current laws regarding ADUs have not eclipsed all of the language in the second unit, and it is now, because one of them specifically says that all second units are now ADUs. So it would be nice to know if in fact where that program stands, what it does, what it has to do, especially when it comes to conversion. So I've reread 1069. We got 35 and 35 with SB 30 coming up. So it would just be nice to know where we are in that. We may, in fact, not have been able to save all the existing codes that we did in November prior to getting information from the League of Cities. That was a rush, I understand that. They went ahead, did what they could to salvage and adopt. And then this thing came out. So it would just kind of be nice, because a lot of that stuff, like I say, may not be of concern or on the books. We may not need to ask or have council consider extending the program, because it may have already been extended by the state of California in a different format. So it would just be nice to have some clarification on that.
Okay, so the observation once again, for the record and the request is that an update on the status of the city's programs, because as of this point in time, as of this date, it is my understanding that the city does not have either program in effect. The second unit compliance program has expired as of 8 March, and there is no accessory dwelling unit program. Is that a correct statement?
The accessory dwelling unit program, let me rephrase that. The second dwelling unit compliance program did expire on March 8th. The current state law is in effect. We have not received any applications in the Building and Safety Department under the new law that I know of.
Is there a form, though? Is there even a protocol for making said application?
1069 did not necessarily alter the building code, which is what my purview is. So there was no language added or deleted from the building code for that. So to apply for a second dwelling unit under the new program would start with community development. And I believe 1069 would affect more of those regulations than the actual building code. So someone could come in to Building and Safety and apply for a second dwelling unit on a regular permit application, but it would still have to comply with the planning department requirements, which is where most of those regulations are being driven from. At least that's my understanding.
Okay, but I don't believe, see, that's the issue is, I don't believe, in the absence of an applicant, kind of producing a condition that will require the exploration of that subject and a methodology being developed. The city has no program, has no forms, has no application beyond the standard building permit, and I'm not sure that the state accessory dwelling unit statute envisions or intends that someone comes in and says, I'd like a building permit, because it's really not a building permit, it's an existing structure. And secondly, I don't believe that there's any format referred to in any of the statutes that are related to the accessory dwelling unit statute that indicates that there is to be an application made through the typical channels of the planning department or community development. So my question is, if somebody walks in, is there a form or a checklist that kind of guides them through the process?
I'd have to get you an answer to that. I don't have an answer.
Okay, my understanding is that there isn't one, but pending your response back, your report back, I'd appreciate, because that would be a
Chair, may I ask another question? And again, if we're not ready and we don't have the answers, that's fine. I'm here to develop questions that we don't have answers for. That's what I think is the most important thing, and then we can close them up. After watching the Planning Commission, listening to Ms. Wald, she was very specific 8 or 10 times. The application is ministerial. Would you kind of, would you like to interpret that for me?
I do not have an interpretation of that. Once again, I'm regulating the building code. I do not have any comment on planning regulations or planning commission.
Okay, that's great. All right, thank you.
Yes, Judy.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Board Member Murphy.
Thank you.
Excuse me, pardon me for my familiarity.
After we find out what the situation is in terms of codifying the 3 programs that we used to have, it was also recommended by our board last month that we develop a policy that would take us out of the business of will serve letters. That should be written somewhere in this process that needs to be developed. And also that we needed a brochure for notification, giving phone numbers, addresses, and a map, and so forth for the various water districts that a person coming in would have to deal with. Since we're going to back off of those subjects, we need to be proactive in terms of helping the community figure out what steps they need to do.
Okay, all right. Anything?
No.
Okay, so having addressed the questions, do you have, the members of the public arrived in a late relative to our public comment period. Does anybody want to say anything? Well, since we have quite a bit of latitude in this regard. No one? Okay. In that case, then, the chair would like to recognize Councilmember Wyrick, Mayor Pro Tem Wyrick, who is appearing apparently in Councilmember Francina's absence as council liaison.
I could just make one announcement real quick.
Please.
Relative to the deliberations that I've heard so far, I had a conference call on dealing with how to allocate basis liabilities across partnership shares, and I'm ready for a drink. But anyway, my understanding is the agenda hasn't yet come out, but my understanding the issues associated with SB 1069 are going to be on the April 11th City Council meeting for deliberations and discussion. That's my understanding. That's what was conveyed in various agenda emails. So it hasn't been come out yet, but that's what my expectation is at this moment. So enough said on that.
Would the council be entertaining at that point any recommendations? Should the Building Appeals Board have them?
Well, all I can say is we're going to be taking it up at that meeting, okay? If this body wanted to, this is your council appointees. If you want to communicate with council, please do so. You know, that's all I can say.
Very good.
But, I mean, I'm not going to say one way or another. All I know is that my understanding is it will be on the agenda on the 11th, based on the information that I have at this moment.
Okay, thanks so much. Excuse me?
And the agenda will go out Thursday for the following meeting, so,
Okay.
for anybody else out there.
That's going to be the meeting of the 11th. So,
I probably ought to mention one more thing, I'm sorry.
okay.
At Saturday's meeting, we did discuss commissions and boards, and it was clarified that if there's an issue about what council's asking in terms of advice or whatever through the channels, go from, you know, city manager to building official to you guys, that, you know, that clarification needs to happen as a majority of the council. It's not the purview of any individual staff person, any individual council person. It's a matter of getting clarified through the majority will of the council. So that came up at the Saturday discussion. Okay. Yeah.
Are you saying that that what goes on our agenda comes from the council?
Well, in terms of advice, the request for advice from the Building Appeal Board either comes from the building official or from council through channels, city manager through building official to you guys. So in other words, the
But not
council can ask for advice, policy advice, like reviewing codes and issues like that. But that's, you know, that's a function of the majority of council.
But are you saying also that the council sets agenda items for us?
Well, it can request
Can request that?
that the BAB be convened for the purpose of providing input into our policy discussions. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's pretty well established. That was well established by the note from the city attorney quite some time ago in terms of the Building Appeals Board protocol that I think everybody circulated
And also
everybody.
the building.
Dale, the other thing that will be added to items without council would be a formal appeal to a building official's decision.
Right.
That
Well, yeah, of
gets
course.
scheduled
I
on
knew
our
that, but
agendas without that. Okay.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Is that's my, I just wanted, I think we're all on the same page here,
Okay.
you know? Oh, yeah, the building, yeah, and our housing appeals for that matter. Building appeals, housing appeals, and I guess there was one other
Yeah, there's one
arcane
other.
reference to some kind of appeal. There basically was three things. I always get a little confused as to what the third one was.
Housing.
It was housing appeal and building appeal.
And housing.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Housing in general.
Housing in general, that's
Yes.
right. So anyway, I just wanted to, I believe the council will be taking up the issue of SB 1069 on the 11th, pretty sure at this point. And we did discuss commission and board protocols to some extent on our Saturday morning session. So,
All right. Thanks so much.
For our building official, Renee, a question. Somebody asked a question. Maybe you can give me clarification. Because our main job is for building appeals. There was a situation prior where someone came in, they wanted something, don't really matter what it is. It was denied. The individual said they wanted to appeal that decision, and that was denied. Want to explain to me how that works? Because I've got fuzzy.
So I have never been through an appeal by a call, but my understanding of the code is, and we have the forms available in the city, is that if somebody wants to appeal a decision, they come in, they have 10 days from the decision to file the appeal.
Will you tell me what kind of, 10 days in this community are pretty fuzzy. Is that from the day they walk in, the day they walk out? Are we going to send a return receipt requested
I would have to
statement?
review the actual wording on the code or get the city attorney to make it. I do know it does say 10 days. They would have that 10 days to appeal. They pay a appeal fee,
$500.
$500, and then we hear the appeal. It's not my understanding that I, as the building official, can deny the request for the appeal. That would be the Building Appeals Board's authority to decide if that is a valid appeal or not. I believe so, but I'm...
Okay, then who are they actually appealing to? Are they appealing directly to the board?
Yes,
And so they would go to the clerk and pay their $500 and get a receipt,
yes.
and then they would request a date? Because they have 10 days to do it. And we don't know where those 10 days are and what starts and stops or how.
Correct.
So they have 10, and then the building appeal board would schedule
The meeting, yes.
it's a hearing.
It's a hearing,
correct?
yes.
There are dates, there are durations of time
Right.
with
But I
which the
just-
city has to respond, and then there's a scheduling.
I just want to clarify.
response time as
Yeah.
well. I happen to have downloaded and printed a Building Appeals Board informational sheet, as well as a building appeal application from the city. And it indicates, the questions, what is an appeal? Appeal is a request for the Building Appeals Board to review decisions of the building official in which it's believed the conclusion reached was inappropriate. Findings, decisions, or determination of the building official can also be appealed. What issues can be considered in an appeal? An application is based on a claim that the true intent of the California Building Code or the rules legally adopted thereunder have been incorrectly interpreted, the provisions of the California Building Code does not fully apply, or an equally good or better form of construction is proposed. The Building Appeals Board may consider appeals of any building-related finding, decision, or determination made by the building official. Who can appeal? Any involved person may appeal a finding, decision, or determination made by the building official. Where is an appeal filed? All appeals to the Building Appeals Board must be filed with the City of Ojai's Community Development Department. What is the filing fee for a building appeal? The filing fee for an appeal is $500, which is refundable if the appeal is granted. What is required to file an appeal? All appeals to the Building Appeals Board must be filed on an official building appeals application form. These forms are available at the Community Development Department. The application form must be completely filled out and clearly state those issues or portion of the findings, decision, or determination being appealed, since the Building Appeals Board will consider only those issues or portions which were raised in the appeal form. Once an appeal is accepted for filing, additional issues cannot be raised after this time or at the hearing. What is a statement of grounds? The appeal application form includes a section entitled Statement of Grounds for Appeal. The statement of grounds is the appellant's opportunity to state the reasons why the decision or determination is being appealed and why the appellant believes that the decision or determination of the building official was inappropriately decided or determined, I would imagine. What happens after the appeal is filed? Once a complete appeal is accepted for filing, a hearing is scheduled. The appellant will be notified of the date, time, and place of the hearing by mail in advance. A staff report will be submitted to Building Appeals Board and made available to the appellant prior to the hearing. The staff report provides information on the appeal and the decision or determination being appealed and may include a recommended action. The hearing on the appeal is then held. What happens during the appeal hearing? The board conducts a public hearing on the appeal, listening to the arguments and the facts from the appellant or property owner, anyone else who wishes to be heard, and from the building official. So that would imply to me that anyone else who wishes to be heard are members of the public at large. The Building Appeals Board or building official may ask questions of staff, appellant, or other persons, providing input at the appropriate time in the hearing process. Once the deliberation phase begins, the Board of Appeals can take action to uphold the appeal, thereby modifying or overturning the previous decision, to deny the appeal, or to continue the hearing for further deliberation or information. When the Board of Appeals makes its decision on the matter, the appeal process is finished. There isn't anything that I can see that relates to the city code section that has the time frames in it on this form, which would submit to me that, I would submit to the city that a informational sheet that does not have the cogent and on-point durational dates that are critical, that the city may later assert as in denying the validity of an appeal, should be on the notice, on the informational sheet, as well as on the application itself, in order to give adequate notice to an applicant, who apparently it could be pretty much anyone. They don't necessarily have to be a citizen of the community, just someone who has an interest in, and it's defined as an involved person. That sounds pretty broad. Okay, so,
And again, I'd like to hammer home, start date, end date, calendar date, business date, proof of service, because we've run into all these issues over a variety of items, whether it was the end being noticed on, and we didn't have a return receipt, we didn't have proof of service. There seems to be that we need to make sure that this process is the same process and it works for everybody and everybody knows, because right now I don't know. So when we can, I'd like to at least make that recommendation that they look at that. There's another thing that strikes me that I'm fairly unhappy with, is the word inappropriate. We've already been through a building appeal. Inappropriate, almost to me, makes it seem that it's with purpose. I think inappropriate is a little harsh, because it could also be an error. There could be other reasons, and inappropriate just makes it sound like it's egregious, or it is pointed, or it is with prejudice, when it can simply be an error. Because the city put me through hell on my wall, and they didn't even decide to open up the code book and see that fences on your property line aren't required permits.
what specific reference to inappropriate were you?
When it says that somebody, you read verbatim, it said somebody may appeal when the building official has made an inappropriate decision. I think that goes too high. I think that's not, I don't think that's correct. I think
Yes.
somebody can make
And that's a statement of grounds portion, yeah.
right?
But that's, once again, this is informational, and
I got it.
The concept is to inform the public, and that is a rather a vague term.
I don't
How-
want somebody to take a look and think, well, it wasn't inappropriate, they were just wrong.
Yeah.
Or they missed, or it was an error.
How about objectionable?
Anyhow, whatever, I just think that verbiage is incorrect. Somebody can look at that, and if that's a city attorney,
Yeah,
tone that thing
thesaurus-
down.
Thesaurus software will be deployed on this one, so.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so, is there anything else that, general? Okay. All right, then, discussion item 2, amendments to the 2016 building code. And there's a recommendation to recommend approved amendments. So, building official, Mario? That is item 2.
So I wasn't quite sure how to present this so that it made the most sense. Would you like to discuss each amendment that I've proposed? Did you have specific amendments that you wanted to discuss? How would you like best to go about this?
Well, let's start with that which I think you've highlighted as the most important, or at least they've been highlighted, so I'm considering them to be important enough to have been highlighted. And one has to do with the expansive soil foundation conditions, which are specific to this, the climate, topography, and geography. And as well as, subsequent to that, the very high fire hazard map. So let's start with the soils conditions.
Okay, is there anyone that objects to that? Because it's kind of jumping through a bunch of them. We're just going to skip through.
You want to start, you just want to
Well,
start with the list?
Well, I wondered if you had any, if we went through the list, were there any ones that stuck out with you that we wanted to discuss? The building code, particularly the administrative chapter, which is where you're seeing most of the amendments, really leaves it up to the jurisdiction to kind of outline certain things. So unfortunately, with us only having adopted the state code, there's sections in here that have no language that we can enforce on the city on the administrative side. So I didn't know if you had any comments on any of the suggestions I made. You'd like to discuss the administrative stuff before we get into the technical
Okay.
ones?
Right, so the way you've got, okay, so we're going to, the listing you have here in the agenda, it starts with suggested additional codes and code appendices, and those look like they could be involve a certain element of discussion. And then you have suggested code amendments, and that's what you're kind of referring to now, which have to do principally with Chapter 1, yes, of the California Building Code.
Yeah, I would say the majority of them do, but you're right, we actually should probably start with a discussion about adopting
Yeah,
certain
because
appendices.
You've got spreadsheet on that, and the other subjects are the appendices are rather to the building code and the residential code, and then the international property maintenance code are, I think, clusters of information that have been spread quite out as far. And yes, I see that the footings, prescriptive footings for supporting walls is at the end of this. So yeah, let's go through the suggested code amendments.
You want me just to read down them?
Yeah.
Okay.
And clarify if you deem it
Okay.
suitable.
The first one is an exception to the California Building Code. So in the California Building Code, the scope of the building code includes all buildings, with this exception, which is detached 1 and 2 family dwellings. The California Residential Code covers detached 1 and 2 family dwellings. In each one of the code books, there's an administrative section. They're a little different in each one. So what I would like to propose is that we use the administrative section in the building code as the administrative sections of all the other codes. So in order to do that, we have to delete this exception, because if we kept it, then it didn't apply to single-family dwellings. Does that make sense? Yes. So that's more of a semantics code change than a technical code change.
Okay.
The next one, section 103.3.1, this is adding a section that we are bringing over inspection and testing from the California Plumbing Code and placing it in Chapter 1 of the Building Code to be used as our administrative section. The same thing happens with 103.3.12. We are moving the inspection and testing procedures from the mechanical code over into Chapter 1 of the Building Code.
Okay, so, but as far as, since this is consistent for each one of these, you've got the plumbing code, you've got the mechanical code, and then you've got the rough electrical as well. Aside, you're basically saying this is administrative efficiency?
Yes.
Okay.
So that our administrative section that we use in the code is the same throughout all the different code volumes, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, et
Okay,
cetera.
and that sounds absolutely reasonable on its face. However, I'm aware that Chapter 1, the administrative code, is a very powerful tool.
No, there's a difference between the California Administrative Code, which is its own book,
Right?
and Chapter 1 of the Building Code, which is the administrative section of the codes.
Which is also a very powerful.
It is.
So that's, notwithstanding that distinction that you just made, that was unintended on my part. I wasn't referring to the California Administrative Code. I was referring to the administrative components of Chapter 1 of the California Building Code. Very powerful. The inspector and the building official and the code compliance people derive almost all of their authority, their purview, and their scope of application review and determination from that chapter. So I'm always concerned about unintended consequences, especially because I've seen so many of them occur in this room. So aside from, and oftentimes I've heard of a lot of things that have been presented as efficiencies to council and sometimes to commissions and boards who either haven't had the time or didn't do the due diligence regarding the actual reading to know, in fact, according to their own conscious opinion, what the implications of the change are. So what you're representing to me, to us, is that aside from efficiencies, there isn't any coalescing of additional authority or purview.
Correct.
Okay, right. Questions?
Jude, did you have a
Discussion?
question first? Because I certainly do. Okay. I'm always puzzled. I feel that the state is incredibly overarching and repressive. I believe that they have way too many people, way too many rules. And one day, Mr. Stewart and Mr. Brian Meadows came out here with a coffin-sized gurney and said there are 30,000 codes in the building code in California. And they wheeled this great big thing in, just straining. How can there be anything else left that we need here in a local municipality of 7,000 people that hasn't already been discussed, rehashed, and implemented by the state? And I guess what I would say is, what do the residents, not the people of the community, what are the residents, what are the voting residents of the city gain or lose by not having had this all these years? What do they lose? And what are they going to gain if we adopt it? Because I just really fail to see. I've always been frustrated by the fact that if you decided to put some new tile behind your kitchen sink and you moved the faucet 6 inches, you had to get a permit. That's always kind of, I've never heard of a faucet flying off and injuring anybody. So I don't understand where the health and safety is, and I don't understand where the state will allow 1945 when it comes to sale for a 1930 home with a gaffer and saddler cooktop and those utilities, and then we need to put this in. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for innovation. I'm all for, having grounded electric systems. I'm all for having GFI. I'm all for not having knob and tube. I'm all for a lot of things that make fire safety and injury safety. What is this going to do? I mean, what?
This will offer a level of consistency from permit to permit to permit for our enforcement power, because Mr. Ulrich is right. Chapter 1 gives the building department all of its operating procedures, if you will, from start to finish, from plan application to inspection to final to certificate of occupancy. It's all in Chapter 1. In California, we adopt the California Building Code, the California Residential Code. Those are written by ICC, the International Code Council. The California Plumbing Code and the California Mechanical Code are written by the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. And the California Electrical Code is written by NFPA. So what you have is in each Chapter 1 for the various code books written by the various code organizations are slight differences in their Chapter 1. I don't believe, and I'm pretty sure they don't grant us any more authority, but for an example, if I remember correctly, in the plumbing code and the mechanical code, the contractor has to call for the inspection, and in the building code, it's the applicant. So that might not seem like a huge difference. However, if the contractor is the one responsible for calling for the inspection and he doesn't, and he leaves the homeowner high and dry, the homeowner does have kind of some recourse to say, hey, it was his responsibility. However, in the building code, if it's the applicant and it happened to be the property owner came in and the contract, it's kind of semantics that way where each code is a little bit different. So if we use one code for the administrative section, then we can have equivalent enforcement across all places. It's not a critical piece, it's just my recommendation.
What, do we have any, I'll get to you in just a minute. Do we have any concept, any thought on why the exception was there and why there is no code language for CBC 103.3.11.12.13 at SEC?
Right, because the exception is there because the California Building Code regulates all buildings except for detached 1 and 2 family dwellings, multi-single family dwellings, townhouses not more than 3 stories above grade plane. That is the sole content of the California Residential Code. So if we were to use the administrative section of the California Building Code for the California Residential Code, we would have to take out that exception.
I see. So, okay. So in other words, the exception in the California Building Code and the CBC provides for application of the California Residential Code, the CRC. So by substituting this, are we effectively eliminating the authority and purview and application of the California Residential Code?
No, we are not.
Then, okay, I don't actually understand then the significance of the administrative change.
The administrative change allows us to use the California Building Code Chapter 1 as the administrative section for the California Residential Code.
And there is no administrative section of the California Residential Code?
There is, it's slightly different than the building code.
Okay, and how is it different?
I would have to go through and compare each section, but it does have some slight differences.
Okay, as a general perspective, I am resistant, shall I say, to, and somewhat to redoing documents and codes that have been promulgated by not only the state but the august bodies that you referenced as far as the ICC, et cetera, because I always like to think that since those folks spend all this time doing all of that stuff and making most of anyone has any business construction or building or development or real estate or anything having to do with that. Our lives much more complicated and very much interested in who knew every 3 years that the potential for so much could change. So what you're suggesting is an efficiency that when those folks have left it this way, I usually think that there's some intent or rationale. I would like to know what that was. I don't myself. Does anyone?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, you understand what I'm?
Yeah, can I just
Go.
ask
yeah.
the building officials? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, and then we'll get to you, Wayne.
Oh, sorry. So you said that it offers consistency from permit to permit,
Correct.
and that's to the aid of the applicant,
I believe so, yes.
To the benefit.
and to the benefit. Now, I would just like to hope that in doing this, if we make any changes or don't make any changes, whatever comes out of it, it's clearer and maybe easier for
Correct.
the applicant, because I won't go into details, but we hear a lot of problems about getting a permit through, or about getting anything through the building department and the CDC, I should say. So we want it to be safe and sound,
Absolutely.
but I want it to be easy for the public to work with.
Okay, well, I think you have to recognize, unless someone has come across and been referenced, a Chapter 1 issue, shall we say? Most folks, and I would even gainsay many contractors and builders and developers are not familiar with that chapter and how much authority it vests. So, hence we're messing with excuse me, we are potentially revising the intent as promulgated and adopted. And I'd like to know not only what the effects are, but what the potential unintended consequences are, but also what was the intent behind leaving it this way or delivering it this way, because it's my understanding it has been this way for more than 3 years.
Correct.
Okay, so we're looking at changing something that has actually been through at least, well, several code adoptions.
Yes.
Okay, there is a California residential code with its own Chapter 1.
Right.
So,
One thing I can say as we get to the later proposed changes to Chapter 1, for example, the time limit on an application. So if we went and set a time limit on an application in the California Building Code, by not using the building code as the administrative chapter for all the codes, you would then have to go into the other code subsequently and set the same time limit on applications if you wanted to. So that's one of the efficiencies I was talking about.
I could also see that being then our own municipal code might be in conflict with this, because we have our own limitations on.
Which don't refer to current code. So I'm going to work with the city attorney once we do our code adoption process, if we do one, to update the municipal code because it's not correct. Correct.
I would ask that we skim over these, make notes. We've come to one item where I don't see any reason in discussing this, because where we have the two and we have nuances between the two, and I have no information as to what those nuances are. Now, we went through this 6 years ago, and we had an 86-page document that looks like this, that it took about a year to get back to us completed with the different highlights, so we knew what underlying city code, state code, proposed city code, and proposed state code changes were. And that was a year to get this document back from the very first date they gave it to us. I don't think that this needs to take a year, but I really think that if you're going to ask me to make a change, and we have some different nuances. I need to know what those are. You said unintended consequences, and I'd like us to make notes on what we need, and we need some explanation on what it really does. And again, we've been operating with this, and maybe I'm wrong because we're in the wrong purview, but I don't think not having these things has sped up or delayed a permit for residents in the city. I don't see where it really affects it. And
I wouldn't think so.
And if we did nothing, it's not going to be faster, and it's not going to be slower. The permits are going to come when the permits are going to come.
Okay.
So I don't see where it's this disaster waiting to happen if we don't just do it. I don't like to do things and find out that we try to undo.
So you would perhaps then be making a motion to request that
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion that what we do is these are really important. We need to look at them. We've not changed a number of things in a number of areas for years, and we really need to do to get up to where we need to get up to, but I really need to see what the differences of these things are.
Okay, so would that be just the ones on the first four here, and then we can get to the more substantive changes in the administrative section?
I'm going to let you make the recommendation because you understand what the nuance changes are, and I don't.
Okay, so on the first four items then with combining which relate to combining all of the administrative sections to the building code, I will provide you with a greater depth of analysis on those. Is that acceptable? Okay. So then skipping over to page 2,
let's, if I might.
Okay.
You had something you'd like to contribute? For the record, identify.
Wayne Maynard, resident, City of Ojai on Gridley Road. And just with regards to the administrative provisions, I think I took Mr. Daddy's question as more a general question about the adoption of the California Building Code by the city and what is the purpose and the need for it. And she answered back to you the specifics with regards to the administrative sections. Did I read that correctly? Is that what your question was kind of? Was your question like on the general provisions, why we're doing?
Well,
Or were you just addressing the administrative portions?
here's what I'm addressing. I'm addressing information I don't have, being asked to make a decision to include something.
Okay.
It was, we had this great petition come in about, gee, would you sign this petition? And I told these perfectly nice people, no. And they said, why? And I said, because I haven't read it.
Okay.
Why would I sign up for something I've never had the opportunity to see? And so that's the answer.
Okay. Well, then, I guess my comments would be with regards to these combined, looking at these administrative sections. My experience is that you've got multiple organizations writing various codes. The state of California picks which ones they're going to do, and we build this California Building Code. The residential code could get adopted by the state of Nevada, and they could not adopt the International Building Code. They could just adopt that one code, the International Residential Code. So it needs an administrative section, okay? So every code has an administrative chapter. And I think what the building official is trying to do is make it more efficient for their staff and for the code process and the city municipal codes to combine it into one chapter for all of the city building code. And it makes sense to me. So, and I think you need to look at her experience and say, I think she knows what she's doing and she's going to do the best for our city.
And I do understand that, but here's what I absolutely think. I think that for 450 cities in 58 counties to have to go out individually and adopt codes is buying a tail and looking for a donkey to put it on. This really should come to the state so it's uniform.
Well, now let me address that, in my opinion, on that, okay?
Sure.
If you look at chapter 1 in the California Building Code under purpose, it says the purpose of this code is to establish the minimum requirements to safeguard the public health, safety, and general welfare. Emphasis on minimum. The California Building Code is a minimum code that applies throughout the state of California. Each jurisdiction, the legislature specifically intends to allow each jurisdiction to make amendments that are more restrictive based on local conditions, topography, climate, all of that. An example that we'll talk about a little bit later is roof coverings.
Well, let's talk about
But let me
this
just-
right now
Can I just
because,
finish?
well, no.
Okay,
You made a statement, let's talk about the statement.
all right.
Why do we need to make permits, which are not health and safety, more or less restrictive? That's what I'm trying to say. What we're saying is we'll make the permits for applicants more uniform. Not that we're going to make the homes safer, not that we're going to make the roof safer, not that we're going to make the electrical or the earthquake safety. What I heard was it makes the permitting process more uniform. And that has nothing to do with geography, topography, right?
Correct.
It-
And
and so,
but you as adopting the city, you can make changes to the administrative provisions without submitting findings for that. to make it more efficient.
I understand that, but, this is the reality, is the issuing of the permits, it's not for local conditions.
Okay.
And so I'm hearing two different things in the same sentence, and I'm just very uncomfortable with that.
Okay. So I guess just back to my other point about minimum standards. When you look at the situation for roof coverings, for example, the California Building Codes allows Class A, Class B, and Class C roofs based on type of construction, and that's the minimum standard throughout the state, okay? Well, that may work fine, like, allowing wood shakes or wood roof coverings as part of the Class B assembly, they allow that. That might be fine in, Monterey County, some coastal city are fine, but we have different topography and climatic conditions here where it's not going to work because we're not going to have the same level of safety. So as a local jurisdiction, we have to have the authority to look at what level of safety we want and what changes we can make. So that's why we make
And
changes.
I agree 500% with you.
Okay.
I agree, and I've been trying for 6 years, depending on what this current code says. We have, and I might have been corrected, but what was submitted last time is wood shake Class C roofs are okay to be replaced up to 50%. And we have been after these people for 6 years
This is your time to change that.
to get rid of that. And so all of these safety items are fine. Permits and process and procedures and other things. I mean,
I didn't understand that was your concern. I'm sorry.
okay, that's what my concern is. And what I would like to do is we really need to have better spark arresters. We really need to go to the smaller screens. We need to do all kinds of things to harden this because we have a fire map here with 250 homes in a very high hazard. And I think that if we're going to have a very high hazard, specific very high hazard fire area, then we need to have specific rules for that area that are carved out from the rest of the city. We have a FEMA zone now that includes over 600 homes. It mandates different construction. And so we need to go with those guidelines that are going to benefit the people best. Okay, so I totally agree with those things. I don't want to see any more unsofted roof eaves, right? I mean, we've got a lot of things, not in this area. And so those things that are recommendations, those things that we can do, I'm all in for that. Quicker, sooner the better. And that would be for upgrades, that would be for additional units, that would be for remodels. I think they have to be implemented, so.
Well, I'd also like to add to that, however, that any adoptions that are specific to the city of Ojai as a consequence of climate, topography, and geography that reflect fire hazard, for example, affect FEMA flood, has to get out, and these discussions, and even to the point of a recommendation by the Building Appeals Board, needs to get out to the public, especially the affected property owners. We are now talking about nearly 1,000 homes, or at least 1,000 pieces of property, most of which are homes, and that are affected in ways that I am almost absolutely certain the majority of those owners are not aware of. And when, it's my understanding that based on those maps, if someone were to go in for a addition or a significant remodel, some of those, the ancillary effects of being placed in those zones would be called into play by the permitting building department. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, if they were located in a high fire hazard severity zone, they would have to comply with the sections of the code that address that, yes.
So I'm concerned whether the city has done a due diligence in notifying the property owners, the citizens that are affected, that of the implications of their being placed by other agencies, by the state and by the federal government, but being placed, their property being placed in that zone and thereby under purview of a completely different set of rules.
So that discussion isn't exactly on the agenda tonight. We're talking about recommended code adoption changes. The fire map would have to be addressed through a direction from city council.
Right. Well, no, I don't necessarily agree with that simply because, as was referenced earlier, this is a housing board as well, and I believe the city council has asked us to review concerns that are related to the housing element in general.
So once again, I'd have to receive that direction from the city manager, and it's not on the agenda for today.
Right, okay. All right, very good. Sue? Yes, there was a question about whether there was a motion. So.
Does it have to be a motion, or can I just take it as a suggestion?
This was previous. I'm going back because we got a little bit off.
No, I mean, does he have to make a motion to suggest that I give you further information on a comparison?
I'd like that to be formalized to that
Okay.
extent, because this is the second time that it, well, I think I'm undervaluing how many times this subject has come up where the question's been asked. Because I know the question was asked, I can recall a question being asked almost at my first meeting of the previous building official, and because that involved at the time the purview of the community development department, he couldn't answer it, and I don't know that we ever got an answer.
I mean, I'm certainly willing to provide you with additional information and comparison with the two,
All right.
with all the administrative sections.
In that case, then from a discussion perspective, do you want to do a resolution on that, or you just want to leave that as a request?
I'm not sure. He made a motion, or started to make a motion. I don't think you went all the way through with it. And I'm just.
Well, no, I think I pretty much went all the way through with it.
Do you want to repeat it? Is it still?
The motion is that we need a determination between the different sections, the different nuances, and what would change. We don't have that. So if somebody said, hey, you voted to do this on this, 103, what was the difference? I'm not going to have a clue. So I would like to have a clue. So I have made a motion, I just lacked a second.
Okay, all right, and we don't, at this point, since it's being recorded and the record will be made accordingly, we don't have to restate what the resolution is. We're going to take a roll call then?
Member Daddy?
Yes.
Yes. Chair Ulrich?
Yes.
And myself, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the next code amendment is section 105.3.2. Time limit of an application. The current state adopted language has no limit on the number of extensions that an application can be granted for in the building code. As long as they request an extension before the application has expired, I could grant them unlimited extensions for years and years and years and years. Sometimes this can create problems with projects that have been around for many, many years, code changes, several additions. So I was suggesting that we create a limit to the number of extensions that an application can have.
Question. That's 540 days. We had one unit here extend 9 years.
If you use the current, the code language, you could do that.
Okay, my question, again, you know, whether this is right or wrong, I've got different questions. Does each extension have to be in a 180-day increment? The initial one must be, I get that.
Actually,
this
it
goes on to
doesn't.
say-
We have the authority as the city to grant it however long you wish, because we have the authority to make whatever changes we would like to in the administrative section without justification.
Well, okay, so if we're at page 2 of 7, and an application for the permit will be deemed abandoned at 180, and then there can be 202 extensions not to exceed 180 days each. That's 540.
Correct?
Is that the recommendation of the city?
That's my recommendation, yes. And the reason I'm making that recommendation is because sometimes other agencies take a very long time to go through their process. So because an application could be in building and safety for quite some time, they may be struggling with the health department, they may be struggling with the state on a stormwater issue. It can take them quite a long time to do that. So I was trying to be fair and allowing people to get through a process. But like I said, we can limit it however long we wish to.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, then the state allows for unlimited, the city's municipal code section 9.2.09 has an expiration of, you referenced the original 180 plus 2 additional terms of 180 each. After any request for extension of a building permit beyond 1.5 years shall be made to and approved by the planning commission. It's what the Ojai Municipal Code says.
And,
So-
and that would be one section I would suggest to the city attorney to change, as I feel that an application for a building permit should be with the building official for extensions, not the planning commission.
Right, well,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But I'm talking about code language, and so we would have to make the municipal code match the building code.
Okay, so then this spreadsheet should include for each one of these items that are either in conflict with the municipal code or would supplement the municipal code with specific language, then shouldn't that also be?
I'm not sure on code adoption, whether when we bring the item forward, if we choose to bring amendments to the city council, if we marry that in with municipal code amendments, or that has to be 2 separate resolutions, I'm not sure. I don't know how that works.
Well, I'm just saying it's a consequence. You adopt this for code, the city council does. And then they also have to revise the municipal code, and this is more than a text amendment.
Correct, but like current code,
Or it's in conflict.
the current building code and the municipal code are in conflict.
Yeah, on several, yeah, and this
This
is
is one
another example
example.
of this. So that's, I don't know, the municipal code has been in the past the intent of this, specifically of the city council at that time. So we kind of have to get into alignment of whether the recommended code revisions or adoptions, which will place possibly additional or maintain existing conflicts with the municipal code, are going to be entertained and are within the intent of both us as the Building Appeals Board to make recommendation to the council and the council to adopt, because it's sounding like, on the one hand, it's editing and aligning for consistency in application and efficiencies when you don't have a conflict, but also it does sound like it's involving several sections of the municipal code, which is my understanding, each one of those revisions, it once it's beyond a mere text, even inclusive of a text amendment, it requires a specific vote. As such, that's going to add a lot of business to the council's agenda.
Okay, I'm going
I
to check
think
with the
they-
city attorney definitely on how that
Everybody- yeah,
works.
how the methodology, because before we start making recommendations, that all of a sudden may aggregate into quite a burdensome list for council, everybody should be more or less on the same page of that's the way it's going to go. Also, that's what I mean by ancillary implications.
Can I ask what happens then, and if we have to defer to Mr. Summers, get this back? What about those permits in process now?
My understanding, every time that there is a code change, if an application has been submitted prior to a code change, it is under the previous code edition.
And again, I'm not fighting these things.
Right.
I just want to make sure that that's,
The application date sets the code that the permit is governed under.
Unless the applicant lets the permit expire, in which event it's a new ballgame.
then it's a new 540 instead of 90 days, right?
Yeah. And, okay. And then, but, no, I'll go ahead. Go
I
ahead,
just have a
Mr.
question for the building official. For the section 105.5 on the expiration after a permit has been issued.
We're not there yet.
What's that?
I said we're not there yet.
We're not there yet? I'm sorry.
We're dealing with the
I support one-
application.
I support the one with the application.
We to 105 yet?
We're at 105.3.2. You're asking whether it's 105.5.
Okay,
We're
I'm
at the
waiting
top
for
one, so,
5.5.
okay.
I mean, I don't think today we need a decision on the,
No,
I just
no,
want to
we're-
explain.
That's what, yeah, we're
Get
engaged in the discussion.
Yeah.
How many, I have to also ask a question for, and this question will be applicable to each one of these recommendations, is how many permits are being presently affected, or do we anticipate might be affected by these changes?
Well, like I said, anytime we make a change, it's going to be applications from
Going
henceforward. Nothing that we currently have in the system
What-
would be affected by
Yeah,
this.
yeah, but what I'm really asking is how many permits how many permit applications are being submitted to the city currently that are going to be affected? In other words, what's the average number of permits that would be affected by these changes? I'm not asking which specific permits.
I don't know specifically for Ojai. I would say in the other cities that I've dealt with, I would say probably 10 to 15% of applications go through multiple extensions.
Okay. All right. Right. Next one then. 105.5, expiration.
So as opposed to the application for the permit, which is usually considered the plan check, there is a limitation on once you issue the permit, when the permit itself expires. So that's the difference between the previous section and this one. This one is dealing with the actual expiration of the permit itself, once it's been issued. So, once again, unlimited extensions by the state, and Mr. Daddy, you noticed that one of the differences, the current state language, the initial is 180 days, and here the extensions are 180 days, as opposed to on the application, the extensions were 90 days on the base code language. So, once again, we would be setting a limitation on how many times a permit could be extended, as opposed to the problem in plan check with just the code addition changes. Sometimes you have a project that can become a detriment to a community because you have a person that puts up one wall and waits 6 months and puts up another wall, and you have a structure that's under construction for many, many years. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen.
We had that on Montgomery, 10 years.
Yeah. So I guess that was my question, so what you're saying is that when a building permit is issued, somebody has to get a final inspection within whatever 180 times 3 is?
No,
No? Okay.
So every
You
time
can't-
we
you can't
come
have a
out,
progress inspection.
every time we come out and do a progress inspection, it extends the permit. It resets the
Sets it to
clock.
180 days.
Yeah.
After the progress inspection. Now, progress inspection would be typically a required inspection, like a foundation inspection or electrical inspection or plumbing
Right,
inspection or
yes.
framing.
Be like a pyramid.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you give me, help me understand why that's important?
Like I said, for some projects, like you said, they could continue for quite a long time. They can kind of become fire hazards sometimes. Blight, all kinds of conditions, and, unsightly for your neighborhood if it goes on and on and on and on and on. It's more of an issue for the neighborhood and the community versus the actual construction of the structure may stay safe.
Are we going to get into a can of worms where everything takes 20 years in this city to get done? It doesn't really matter what it is.
That's what I'm trying to avoid
So I'm
during
looking
construction.
I'm looking at a word in here called justification. Is that appealable to the city council, or are we going to have every one of these every time we're going to come and hear how the cow ate the cabbage?
If I started just telling everybody no, probably.
Okay. Again, it's the vagueness, it's the uncertainty, and we have had for at least a number of decades different rules on Monday than we have on Tuesday. That's just, we have a different rule between the same house and the same tract built next door to each other.
I mean, justifiable is actually the model code language.
Okay. Well, no, and that's important to me. So if that is a model code language, then we have basis.
It's model code language.
Okay.
Okay. The next section, 109.4, this is about people starting work without a permit. So the base code says that we shall establish a fee by the building official. And since we haven't made amendments to this section, there is no penalty, according to the building code, fee that can be assessed for starting work without a permit.
I think that's got to get run past the city attorney about whether that's in fact a fee or a fine, an administrative levy. Because I could foresee someone saying, a building official or an inspector's, getting called out to a job, or where some work of improvement is occurring, and there's no record in the city of a permit being obtained, and the going out there and going, okay, what's going on? You're doing this work here without a permit. And then you need to come in and get a permit, and when they come in and get the permit, then they get hit with up to twice the permit fee, saying, what's this based on? And well, there might be a section in the CBC. I could also see them saying, well, this is a unilateral determination made by the building official or the building official's agent, and that being challengeable in court as an administrative fine.
Yeah, I just used fee because, like I said, that's the model code language.
Yeah, I think that needs, well,
And like right now, if someone did come in after we gave them a stop work notice, we don't have the authority to double fee them. We would just be charging them their permit fee.
yeah, well, I think the intent there is it got them in to within the purview of the building department for health, safety, and the purview of the city to regulate within its limits, city limits. So that would be a question I'd have right out of the box about whether this, because if this is deemed to be, notwithstanding who generated it, if it's deemed by the city attorney to be an administrative levy or administrative fine, that would kind of throw the whole thing out the window right there.
Okay, I'll ask him.
And Renee, in here, and I don't like to do hypotheticals. That just doesn't work. Let's just go right down the block and pick each specific problem. we have somebody, they get a permit to repair the toilet, and you drive by the corner there, and the entire building is removed. Really? I'm telling you, we removed an entire building on a remodel, and the building just disappeared on the corner. Where is that in here? Where is this mission creep? Where is the past the scope? Yeah, they could have gotten a mechanical, they could have gotten a whole bunch of, they got a remodel permit. But once they got in there, it disappeared. That happened to the Thunderbird. They got in there, and the entire building disappeared.
If you were going by the letter of the code, then they would be doing work without a permit and could be subject to that fee.
And
If you were going by the letter of the code, yes.
so would it be kind to put demolition in here? Because it says mechanical, it says plumbing, but it doesn't really address demolition. We've
Well,
had
it
a
says,
number of.
it says work on a building,
Okay.
and work on a building
right,
to me
if-
would be demolition,
Okay,
because you're working on the building.
because that happens a number of times during remodels. Okay.
Okay. The next section, 109.9, refunds. The code language says the building official is authorized to establish a refund policy. So basically, we have no refund policy.
I got mine.
Somebody must have been very nice.
Well, they didn't refund me my attorney's fees. I guess I could have asked for that back.
No, this is for your building permit refunds.
Oh, I know for the wall I didn't need to say that's, and that's what you're really talking about here, incidental things.
I'm talking about somebody comes in and they come in and they pull a permit to remodel their bathroom, and they decide to change their mind. They don't want to remodel their bathroom, so they would like a refund on the permit. Typically, most cities will keep a small portion of it because they dealt with the time that the permit tech took or the cashier or whatever, and then they refund the amount back to the applicant.
What now?
So that's what that
Okay.
section is about.
She's establishing a correction.
109.7, there's currently no code language dealing with reinspection fees. Some jurisdictions like to establish that if you have someone that's calling you out 10 times and they still haven't corrected the initial thing, or they haven't made any progress, that you can charge a reinspection fee. It would be entirely up to the city if they wanted to establish that kind of a policy for reinspection fees.
What, and again, please, if you can get notes back for us, what is the inspection fee now? That's in the basic permit.
That's the permit fee, correct.
What kind of, now,
My example might be a water heater. So you go out, you inspect a water heater, you write a set of corrections, you've collected approximately
$90.
$50 or $70 for a water heater. You go out there again, the corrections haven't been done, leave them again. You know, this could go 4 or 5 times. You've been out to the same property, the corrections haven't been made. You charge them a reinspection fee or not? That's a policy that should be set by the city.
well, I think a water permit is, I got one when I replaced my water heater. I think it was like $90.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
And of course, all the plumbers tell you, don't worry about it, but you know what, that's not the way to go.
So anyway, that's a section that might want to be addressed.
So what is the thought process? Would recommend 50%, hit them 100% each time, come out 5 times, there's $450. That gets to be quite pricey.
It could get quite pricey, but on the other hand, your staff is going out there multiple times. The permit, if the permit fees are reasonable, you know, if the water heater costs $90, that costs the permit tech's time and an inspection by the building inspector, maybe a second inspection by the building inspector, assuming that most of them have corrections. But it starts to not cover cost anymore if the inspector is going out there 3, 4. It doesn't happen a lot.
Renee, who generates the action to send the inspector out? Is this being done by the builder or by the inspector?
The permit holder is the one that's calling the
Calling and
inspector.
saying it's ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I would in looking at that kind of condition, I always like to, since I oftentimes hear, it's not a defense, perhaps it's an observation. I didn't know or I didn't realize that before, I would like any recommendation I made regarding this to have a warning first, at least.
Oh, absolutely.
A written warning so that there is no equivocation the next time. But my other concern about this one is instances where reinspection fees have been assessed, additional inspection of the work will not be performed until the required fees have been paid. That is a point of dispute that could become any half-finished project, then now if someone continues and finishes it, now it's a red tag situation. And if it was the aforementioned, hypothetical of a water heater, if I'm reading this, water heater, someone finished the installation of it, or connected it up in such a fashion that they're using it and it's not compliant with the requirements of the plumbing code or the building code, now they have an additional fine as well as the potentiality of the building official red tagging that. You have that within the purview. I don't care what the size of it is. You could red tag the.
If it was an unsafe condition, I could red tag it, yes.
Right, which means now you have someone who, because it doesn't have hot water, and that's not even technically, that's a violation of 1941, that's a violation of the the building code, that's a violation of the health and safety code. Someone could actually, at that point, have to move out of the property, and if it involves a tenant or if it involves a, other house share kind of situation, now you have people that okay. So that's what I mean by ancillary, effects and implications. That's pretty serious over what started as a excess, not ready for inspection condition, or excess inspections. So that to me is getting into.
But the bottom line to that situation is they have an unsafe water heater. That's a danger to them.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying that you also, the danger aspect because of someone not getting inspected or responding to what the requirements of a previous inspection were, has now gotten into a displacement, potentially displacement. Ideally it would happen on a weekday when the local hotels have a couple of rooms available, because if it was on a Friday, I don't even know about Camp Comfort. So,
Mr. Ulrich, Mr. Chair, I would like to add something more for discussion. And Renee, I'd like you to consider and figure out where the authority has to go with this. I would like to see on the permit the terms of reinspection, which will say re-inspections are equal to the amount of the permit. Make sure the work is complete, something like that. If we tell them ahead of time, what I don't like is having people find out what the consequences are later. And so if we put that right on the permit and they know it in its big red block, a reinspection will be in the amount. For this reason, we went through this long, laborious discussion over time, and the state law says the city can't charge more than the actual cost. And we read it, and that's state law. We don't get to mess with that. That's there, they push down. So that's state law. I would think that looking at that little city transparency thing they put up in the hall there, about we're going to be transparent, tell everybody what it is and do all this stuff, it doesn't appear to me that we should be asking the rest of the residences to pick up the cost below the inspection, because we're not asking for the adequate amount. So I don't see how we can't charge more than the $90, because that's what we've established. But I don't think it's fair if it actually costs 90, we've established it's 90, that we charge less than that equal amount. So I don't know where that needs to work. We can work with that and make a recommendation to council, and then that's council's issue.
If I may,
Yes.
I previously worked for a jurisdiction. It was fire authority, obviously, and it became a problem of certain contractors would basically do their work, quality of work, based on the level of your inspection, rather than just installing the thing the way the code requires. And so inspectors would be going back multiple times, telling them what they had to do. And so we initiated an hourly rate, is the way we did our additional inspections. So when you got your permit, it authorized a certain number of inspections. If you had to do any additional inspections above and beyond what the permit required, you were invoiced for over an hourly rate for what the inspector's cost was. And it seemed to work pretty good for us, so.
I think
just an
that's a
option.
fantastic idea, and as long as it's clearly on the permit, where everybody is well aware, again, that's where every little thing doesn't have to. The city council's got a lot of stuff to do. They can't be asking, having people up here constantly parading for these little exceptions on every little thing that happens in Ojai. So if that's something we could get a recommendation, put something in there so we can make it so they can figure it out. I'm pretty sure Rudy can tell you what it's going to cost.
Yeah, and I mean, I would recommend if we did this, it would be, after the third inspection on the same thing that corrections haven't been done, so you put a number so that people know what it is. It's not just going to be some arbitrary thing for you. If you go out the third time, we're charging it. For you, if you go out the eighth time, we're charging it. That's not fair.
Or not charging it on the 8th time. That's what's not fair.
Yeah.
And there is one other, alternative application for any kind of fee for additional excessive inspection, re-inspection, however it's referred to, and that is, as an alternative, you can also require that re-inspection fees, which have been lawfully assessed, are paid before the final. I realize that if you have it during the course of things, that kind of helps the process, but it can also delay the process. Whereas if it's assessed, they're assessed, but making the final approval a condition of payment of all fees, that might be a means of ameliorating that delay factor. The city gets compensated for the additional inspector's time and staff time is necessary, and the purpose of the entire exercise, which is an approved, completed permit, is achieved by both parties. So,
Speed up the process.
sure, okay.
All right, so that ends the administrative proposed amendments. So now we're going to start to get into the technical amendments. So the first one is Table 1505.1, which is the minimum roof covering classification for types of construction. The table currently allows Class C roofing in all types of construction. I would propose that we change that and elevate it so that Class minimum B type roofing would be required for all new construction because of the high fire area that we live in here.
How does,
Oh, I thought you were going to
have
have
a question? Let me, if I may, how would this be applicable to repair?
This section is not applicable to repair. We would have to specify how much on a
Percentage.
repair
Yeah.
would require an upgrade of the entire roof.
And we would notice and enforce that because the insurance companies pick up that code ordinance separation in every basic policy, except California Fair Plan.
If you replace a certain portion of your roof,
If
they
we
pick up
have
the
a
cost.
damaged roof because of the 70-mile-an-hour winds of 3 weeks ago,
Right.
were we to have the Pasadena, and I'll send it to you if you like the Pasadena rule, that said once your roof is damaged 10%, you can no longer have any shakes. And I want to get off the shakes. We'll just say Class C for this example. 10%, no more Class C. and then that goes to a code enforcement? Because really what insurance does, it pays for what's damaged. The code enforcement, we pay for what's not damaged, but has to be removed as a result of the code.
So in Pasadena, if 12% of your roof was damaged,
It's
you
all
could not
done.
repair it with the Class C, you would have to replace the entire roof.
And I don't believe they've gone to a B, and I'm sure you have something to say, and when you're done, or if you're including this, I would like from somebody here to give me with specificity the difference between a B and an A.
Exactly, that's what I want to tell you about.
Thank you.
Okay.
I want to hear that.
Okay. Roof classifications, I just wanted to make sure you guys understood what that really meant. In general, a Class A roof can, let's see here. Class A roof can protect a structure from an extreme fire exposure, Class B roof from a moderate fire exposure, and a Class C roof from a light fire exposure. That's kind of the general performance terms they use. So what is a class rated roof? Basically, it's passing a standard fire test. And a standard fire test doesn't necessarily mean it's equivalent to actual world conditions out in the real world. It's a standard test. For example, probably one of the toughest parts in the Class A and Class B test is the burning brand test, which is part of the overall test procedure. For Class A roof, they take a 12 by 12 crib of 3 pieces of wood, they crib it up, they put it in a furnace, they catch it on fire, and they set it on the roof covering, and they set it there, they put a fan on it to simulate the wind blowing, and they let it sit there for an hour and a half and see if the roof deck catches fire, okay? That's the Class A test. Class B test is with a smaller brand, 6-inch size. Well, I guarantee you that the fan that they use on their Class A test and Class B test is not equivalent to a 45 or 60 mile an hour wind when the fires are burning. It's basically enough wind to keep the fire going for the brand test. So that's what I mean, that it doesn't really represent real life conditions, okay? So that's kind of the difference in the testing. And so you have to be aware that it's just a standard test, and it doesn't really necessarily apply to local conditions, and that's why we have to look at that. The other thing with wood shakes, which I looked at this today, it was really very interesting. I've always had a problem with treated wood shakes because I don't think they really work. And when I read in here today, it says that to get a fire retardant treated wood roof to be allowed on a Class B or A roof assembly, they have what they call an accelerated weathering test. And for wood shakes, it's a 10-year, an accelerated weathering that simulates a 10-year life on the roof. So they put water on it, they heat it up, they run that cycle multiple times to try to simulate a standard environment. Well, in order to meet to get the fire rating, they only run that 10-year test for 5 years. So they take that shingle that's been tested for 5 years under the simulated weathering, they then install it on the test assembly, and if it passes, it gets a rating, a fire retardant rating. And it's only been exposed to the simulated weather for 5 years. Well, in real life, we know that these wood shakes are on there for 15 or 20 years in real weather conditions. And so, my opinion, and if you look at the city municipal code that we've had for many years, which isn't enforceable for the high fire hazard areas, we specifically prohibit wood shake roofs. And so I would like to see that provision that we've had historically in our city municipal code of not allowing wood shake roofs in fire hazard areas to be brought over into this code adoption. Okay, 'cause I think that's very
There
important.
will be 2 exceptions to that, Mills Act and certain heritage.
I think you could have an exception that would say,
I think that's a state exception. We just built a brand new one.
I'm not sure, but you could probably put an
With
exception
wood.
for like registered historical landmarks. You got the Libby House up on Foothill, I think.
And not like the Ford Agency had that 50, 60-year-old wood roof on it before they put the new winery. That's
anyway,
the kind of stuff that's happening.
So I support the building official's recommendation that we go with a minimum Class B, and I read that as that would be a minimum Class B roof throughout the city, not just high fire hazard areas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you support a minimum Class A?
My recommendation is that we go with a minimum Class A roof in fire hazard areas. Now, under the state law, there's 3 designations of fire hazard areas. You have the very high fire hazard area, you have a high fire hazard area, and you have a moderate fire hazard area. And I don't know what maps the city has adopted. I pulled down the maps that the state printed up. You know, these guys here. And the only one I found for the within the local area of the city of Ojai was a very high fire hazard severity zone.
Very.
Very high fire. Now, I guarantee you that we have areas that are fire hazard areas that are not on this map because they're not very high fire hazard severity zones. And I'm concerned about that. So under our old municipal code, or our current municipal code, the way we used to do it was we had a 500-foot rule. And we went out and we inspected each property individually when they got a permit to determine if they were within a fire hazard area. If they were within 500 feet of a high fire hazard area, then they had to comply with the construction requirements. And we looked at each lot individually rather than going off a map that somebody up in Sacramento put together that really doesn't provide us the protection we need in our community, in my opinion.
Isn't that 100-foot now? Because I remember.
The 100-foot requirement is for vegetation clearance. The
Right.
500-foot is for construction requirements, is the way it's
Okay.
been in the past.
Okay. Bill,
So-
any other questions? You guys got anything? Because I'm going to make a
If-
recommendation.
What happens, how is it treated? No, and I understand what we're discussing here has to do with with 2 areas. One is the very high fire hazard area, and then there is the rest of the community, the rest of the city. But based on
In my
that.
opinion, there's additional areas. I think we have a very high fire hazard severity area. I think we also have areas that could probably be considered high fire hazard severity areas that are not on this very high hazard map.
Okay.
And they need to get addressed somehow.
On that 500-foot rule, how are the properties treated that are just on the other side of the line where the red stops? In other words, if you're applying,
When we did the 500-foot rule, you went up and you saw where the vegetation area was, and you went 500 feet from there, and you had to build your house with the additional construction requirements for
so
fire
that
safety.
map exceeds 500 feet from source of fuel source vegetation.
I believe that's their intent.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the middle of several tracks, if you will, at the northern reaches of the city. And I'm just kind of saying, well, they are outside of, if they're further than 500 feet, I don't know what they're basing, what the fire map's based on, and what happens, what are the implications of the immediately adjacent properties to that? They're not in a very high fire hazard. Are they in a
Correct. My understanding-
high fire hazard? Are they in a moderate? I mean,
They are in a none, in my opinion. So you have this
Yeah.
little red line here, so everything above the red line is the highest level. Everything below it
is
is
not
nothing.
nothing. Yes,
It's my understanding how it works.
and that's that right there is a lot of clarification that needs to be, because
Well, I think that if we go with a Class B roof covering throughout the city, I think that you're going to mitigate that deficiency.
including in the red area,
No.
No, the red area would be Class A.
Class A.
Everywhere
Okay.
else in the city would be Class B, in my opinion.
Okay, so hence my concern.
Which I believe is what the building official is recommending, right? Class B throughout the city.
Correct.
Okay, so
But-
No, wait,
But did you recommend Class A in the fire map?
Class A right now is required in the building code for very high fire hazard severity zones. So it's already a requirement in the state building code. The problem I have is that I believe we have other hazard areas that are not very high hazard that need to have the additional construction.
What's the easiest, fastest way to elevate that so we can get an understanding, designation, proximity, and get a corrected map? What do you think is the best way that
Well, I always
we
like
can
going
make
out
a
and doing
recommendation?
I always like going out and doing a physical evaluation of the property,
Okay.
is what I liked.
But your recommendation is that a Class B would cover that.
It would cover, I believe there's areas like if you look at, I think it's called Crotona, the area that we did that have the historical overlay or whatever,
Historical
Taramina.
historical district, okay, they back right up to.
Yeah, that's
wildland area.
Taramina, and they've had a number of fires
Yeah,
there.
they
and
back right
come
up the
up
fire
there.
area, and they're not on here.
Right. Neither is Catrona, which is the other side, that 180 acres.
Yeah.
And
So-
neither is,
Those are areas that need additional, in my opinion, need additional, some of the additional protections for the,
So what do we do to get a better map?
can answer that. I think you either go out and do it, or you go out and look at each property, which I think is a waste of time because we don't have that much construction. So I think you go out and evaluate it on a case-by-case basis.
can the building official expand this map within the city?
It's my understanding the state authorizes the local, local authority, or whether they call it the local jurisdiction, you can do your own maps. That's what I believe.
Okay, I'm going to make a recommendation in the interest of time. One is that we consider, I would rather just consider, it's only 4.5 square mile town, Class A for everything, because we have sundowner conditions, we have high wind conditions, and we've had too many fires, Laguna Beach and a number of other ones, where they were fine until the debris landed up against the house. It took the one house down. It took the entire row at 250. And so I would recommend with these flying frisbees that we do a study to expand the map prior to the end of the year and designate high, moderate, expand the very high where it's necessary, and take a look at the impact of an A, and we're done, then it's uniform. So,
Okay, the only consideration there, though, is that Pasadena model, the 10 or 15% for triggering a replacement now, assuming it's a Class C, now it's going in Class A.
and that's fine, and the insurance companies will pay for that as long as we will designate and put that as a code or ordinance law. It's in everybody's insurance policy.
Do you guys have a recommendation for percentage? For, a percentage for repair and then replace?
Well, I would, this is just my thumbnail opinion, having some background in this area, is typically speaking, wind or, say, a falling tree damages, 10% is fairly minimal and easily repairable and easily justifiable. If it's less than that, unless somebody, there's a big dispute about where it's 9% and what's 11%. But most people can take pretty accurate square footages of a roof. Roofers do it all the time. And above that, it's a serious enough damage, wind or tree or falling object, that would justify, especially with the support of the insurance companies, if it's codified, that to me would be an adequate and reasonable trigger point, 10%.
A 10% point? My only thought to that is that in my experience, the buildings that I've seen damaged by trees, it's probably closer to 20 to 25%.
That's what I'm saying, it
But
exceeds that.
It would exceed the 10%, and then it would trigger them to
Yeah,
upgrade the
pretty
roof.
easily.
Yeah.
Pretty easily. If somebody's house is suddenly wearing a tree, there's many other implications far beyond, structural implications far beyond the
Right.
roof.
So a 10%.
With that, and this is not appropriate and it's not in the right classification, but again, we're getting late and we're going to be folding up here fairly soon. My concern has been, and we've discussed, and I've discussed with a lot of people over a lot of years, where we have this very high area, and we're going to do some major repairs. We really need to do a number of things. I was very disappointed with a giant tree on a house, wood shake roof. We didn't enforce the 2-wire no ground. We did nothing. I mean, we were done. We let them put the same wood roof back on Foothill Road, and that was it.
Yeah, I
And
think that would be a discussion on its own. At what point do the various systems in the house need to be upgraded to current code?
Well, I was very unhappy that we left the bare wire running from the house to the garage. And that wasn't something that got done. So for whatever discussion this is, we need to harden these homes. And then the other discussion is when it comes to remodeling and upgrades, a number of cities have a percentage or a value or a percentage of the value. And I've seen cities where they make them remove the exterior wood sidings, and they need to block in the roof soffits. And everybody now needs to put in, as a result of the witch fire down in San Diego, all of the vent screens need to be a much smaller grid. So whenever you have time to try to work that, I would really like to have an adequate fire-safe code put in where we have a checklist of half a dozen things that are not that egregious. Because again, with a smaller screen, we would have saved 2,300 homes in North San Diego County. Okay, wind blown, and we've got the wind, and they've got the proximity. So I would very much support you and urge you to come up with some ideas on how to incorporate those.
Okay. Are we done with that item? Okay. The next one, 1803.1, geotechnical and soils investigations, changing the code language just from any engineer to the use of a California licensed engineer. That's the language change in that section.
If I read this correctly, it actually doesn't even say engineer. It says registered design professional. That could be an architect.
Correct.
That can be anyone. This does involve, it makes reference to three
Yeah, 'cause this is a
components which
different-
are not necessarily related. One is in situ testing. That's a soils testing laboratory. Laboratory testing, which can be done in a soils or material testing laboratory, and then engineering calculations, which require an engineer or a licensed engineer in any case, that can be sometimes under certain circumstances, I guess depending upon the number of stories of the building, can be done by a registered design professional who can be an architect or other. Because registered is a form of licensing, but usually it's referred to in the state government code as licensed, whereas registered has a tendency of being a particular professional organization. That is not the language that I would like to see if we're trying to say it has to be, it was done by an engineer. Then there are three components to the recommendation. Geotechnical investigations shall be conducted in accordance with sections 1803.2 and reported in accordance with 1803.6, where required by the building official or where geotechnical investigations involve in situ testing, laboratory testing, or engineering calculations. Such determination must be made by a California licensed engineer experienced in soil engineering. That's vague in and of itself. What is the determination for the criteria of experience in soil engineering? The soils expansion index must be listed in all soils investigation reports. So what triggers a soils report now, according to our current or recently effective building code?
It has various trigger points. Some of them just based on an engineer asking for it, sometimes just a building official asking for it, but in most cases, hillside construction is going to require soils engineering, a lot of retaining walls, which also deal with hillside construction in general, although if you've gone subterranean, that could involve, retaining walls as well. It's major construction, certainly not an addition on a flat lot.
Right, and which is where most expansive soil is encountered, where flat lots where clay is aggregated over the course of geological time. So the reason is given as requires the use of a California licensed engineer. my understanding and experience is there are different types of soils experts. There are licensed soils engineers, there's licensed geotechnical engineers, which is a specific form of a engineer with additional training relative to geology. And then there's civil engineers and structural engineers who are all, okay, but civil engineers may have experience and background in soils. Structural engineers usually don't have specific background in soils unless they have a particular reason or need in their career. So this is all kind of a little loose in terminology, and if you're making a requirement or something that could be triggered by a determination of the building official, this is the kind of thing that is not only expensive, it can take a bit of time. Usually they're pretty efficient in there. But this is, there's a lot of variation here that I see people being able very easily to trip over or run into.
Yeah, I didn't want to limit someone's ability to hire a civil engineer with soils experience or possibly a structural engineer with soils experience. That's why I didn't specifically list them, but we did want to make sure that they are licensed in California so that they know our particular soils and seismic issues in the state.
Yeah, well, that's pretty, yeah, okay. All right, okay. Anybody have any questions about that beyond?
No, that's fine.
Okay, all right.
The next code amendment is for 1809.4 table, section 1809.4 and table 1809.7. This is requiring additional depth footings in the city of Ojai. Typically, because of our expansive soils, we have the possibility of slab cracking in the city. Now, I don't have the history here, and I think that it's possible. This is a pretty standard code change throughout Ventura County. But I do not know if this is a particular issue in Ojai. I asked my company to check with our soils engineer, and he said Ojai does have pretty expansive soils. We have some seismic issues and the such. But do we in this city have a history of issues with slab cracking in this city? If we do not, then maybe you don't want to consider this. I do have to say that in the plans that I've been seeing come in, most people are giving us 27-inch deep footings because they're used to doing that throughout Ventura County. But according to the code that have been forced to use, it's 12 inches.
And you know, that's kind of interesting because we enforce things that are totally different. So our prior city treasurer, Boyd Ford, he had a 160 square foot shed. They moved, shed. They required 27-inch footings. And Reggie Wood put that in. And that was and that's why I have a lot of problems with what we do in this community, because there's no basis for them putting these restrictions and these specifications on.
Yeah, like I said, this is a standard recommendation from soils engineers that have worked in the state. You know, I talked to several. They said, "Oh yeah, this is very standard." But then when I asked what the reason was, it's for slab crackage, and I do know other cities where they've had problems with that. I don't know the history in Ojai. I don't know if we've had trouble with slab crackage here. So.
Yeah, we're not having problems. I see a lot of this stuff, especially because I'm in so many houses where we have slab leaks and water leaks and the carpet's up. I get to see, what's going on. A quick question. How can we enforce a 27-inch footing?
We can't.
Well, we did, and I'd like to pull Boyd Ford's permit with you and go over it and find out.
When was his permit issued?
Oh, probably 10 years ago.
Well, I wasn't here then. I didn't have...
not you, but I just want to make sure.
Maybe 10 years ago, that was the code then.
I think we adopted everything since 1987 from Ventura, but I just want to make sure.
Well, if you adopted the Ventura County Code,
Yeah.
This is in the Ventura County Code. The table I gave you is out of the Ventura County Code.
Okay, but ours shows 12-inch.
Right, because we're doing state code, state minimum.
Okay. Wow, okay, I don't
But
want to, we need to back off to 12. You know,
So-
the 27 is a pretty big number. Two-story maybe, but one-story.
the next 1, 2, 3,
Because specifically, I would be concerned about these new ADUs. We're going to have these houses that are somewhere between 250 square feet and 1,250 square feet at 27-inch foundation. Over in Golden West seems to be like an overkill.
yeah, I never really thought about it until I worked on this package for you, because I'm just so used to enforcing 27-inch deep footings everywhere that I go. In every city that I've worked in for Abbott in the state of California, it's 27-inch deep footings.
Okay.
May I ask, so is that regardless of the size of the building or the footprint of the building?
Correct.
So even for a small, like an ADU or something would be.
Correct. And like I said, most of the plans we're seeing, they are already providing that because that's what they're used to providing. But it's not a code requirement in this city right now.
Okay.
How much more expensive is it to do 27 versus 12? Is that a big deal?
I don't know the cost. You've got labor because it's twice as deep as a regular footing and more than twice the concrete from 12 inches to 27.
And more than twice the steel.
No, the
No,
steel
same
isn't
steel.
integrated. Still 2 number 4s top and bottom.
Okay.
Okay. So we're staying at 12.
The excavation, I don't, since it's, I guess from 12 to 27 doesn't matter as far as the preliminary archaeological assessment and that kind of, well, no, that's, it matters, for example, in the city of Ventura, especially in their historical zone, if you have a 12-inch deep footing versus a 27 or a 30-inch deep footing, because high degree of likelihood, 12 inches, you're not going to be encountering anything. Below that, high degree of likelihood, you will encounter some artifacts. So that could, I won't call it a can of worms, it's a can of artifacts, but that will open up a completely different implication to the builder. So, that's.
Chair, we have some items to come back on the first 4 that we've requested. It's 8 o'clock. We're not quite through this. We're barely halfway. We have a bunch of other items to discuss, and we've got the international code. I would like us to schedule a meeting as quickly as we can, maybe 3 weeks or so, to finish this up. Look at the information that we've got on the first 4 items, see where we are on solidifying our recommendations, and then take the last half of it in the international code in 3 weeks if possible.
Okay, is that a resolution?
That's
a recommendation.
Actually, that's a plea.
Okay, all right, well, anybody have anything to comment, any addition?
I don't, we have a 2-hour limit on these meetings?
No, we really don't, but what I think is that this is probably gonna go till 9:30 or 10, based on
Maybe we
the
could
international code, which
just
would
finish-
take a couple of hours all by itself.
Yeah, I think the International Property Maintenance Code, we could do our own, but maybe we could just finish this, because some of this kind of relates to the administrative section, some of it is repeat from suggestions that are in the building code, because we're dealing with the residential code. We might be able to power through them if you want to.
So we're on 5, we're on 4.
So the next 3 items, the California Plumbing Code, California Mechanical Code, California Electrical Code, and the California Residential Code, those 4 items all had to deal with combining the administrative sections of the code. So we could kind of skip past all those,
Because you're going to be.
because we're going to give you
Review
further
that.
information.
Okay.
The next section is in the California Residential Code. It's section 337.1. And what it does is, instead of using the residential code for construction in the wildfire exposure, we would use the building code, chapter 7A.
Okay, what,
And
which properties would this be affecting?
this would be the ones in the red zone.
My understanding is, and this is from the, county fire, that, you've got, that 20 acres of, they grow hay there sometimes, I think, that runs north-south and is due east of Mercer Avenue. That's a wildland urban interface. So that would, if I understand that designation to be accurate, then those homes would be affected by this.
The homes that, you want to help me out here? So I'm trying to create once again, some consistency with our enforcement, because I know that the fire department uses chapter 7A, which actually has been written by the state fire marshal. It's different than chapter 7 in the building code. It's chapter 7A of the building code. And so these houses will be required by fire when new construction goes to fire. They're going to be using this standard. It would make it consistent with us too, to be using 7A for the houses in the residential code.
Okay, well, the reason I'm saying is because the wildland urban interface is a fire designation, not a building code designation. And
Correct.
as such, if there's an incorporation by reference, chapter 7A into the building code, of that exterior wildfire exposure, then there's another whole bunch of properties that need to be noticed within any changes we're going to be imposing on them, because that would be applicable if somebody decided they wanted to put a room addition, would it not?
Correct.
So that means the room addition would involve fire-rated assemblies or fire-resistant elements that would not be consistent with the rest of the house or the rest of the architecture, perhaps, of that house. And they'd have to make this, they'd have to make their addition.
There are current requirements in the residential code for wildland urban interface areas as defined in this section. So there are requirements. My suggestion is just to use 7A instead of the ones in the state code.
In the,
Wildland urban interface area.
And we're going to get something that tells us what 7A is?
We will.
And how much wood, and what we're going to do as far as...
On the same type of comparison I do for you for one, I will do for this.
I just got to reemphasize it. This is now going from approximately 250 properties. I'm saying this from my realization. It's going from 250 properties that have been designated in the very high fire hazard map to now all of the, and it's really the perimeter of the city in many areas where there are adjacent to what has been designated by Ventura County Fire as wildland urban interface.
This section in the residential code is state language. This says that this chapter applies to building materials, systems, or assemblies used in the exterior design and construction of new buildings located within a wildland urban interface fire area. That is state code. So those houses are already in that area, whether we say they are or not.
Okay, yeah, but I understand. I don't think the owners know that. And
Noticing and all that, that's something else we can deal with at another time. You know, like I said, I'm just bringing up, in the efforts of,
yeah.
Getting through these, this
it's
is
an
just code amendments.
However, that consideration has not been addressed by past councils, past staffs, past city hall folks that I'd say are responsible for letting the community know about implications. That,
Right, not on our agenda tonight
yeah.
to talk about.
Yeah, well, but it is part of
The noticing is not part of it, but the fact that we're dealing with the people in the area is, and we can deal with the noticing at another time.
Right, to be specific, it's the implications and the ancillary effects of adopting any changes to what is already affecting, perhaps unbeknownst, the property owners. So,
Right.
okay,
I'll get you a comparison on that.
okay.
401.1. So,
Tell me what that is, because I'm heavily involved in flood zones and flood insurance.
well, this isn't necessarily an amendment for flood, it's an amendment for seismic. The residential code allows you to use wood for foundation systems, so not concrete, wood. I am recommending that in our seismic design categories, D0, D1, D2, and E, that we do not allow wood foundation systems for our structures in the
And
city.
that's direct contact?
Yes.
Soil wood foundation?
Yes.
Is anybody, I didn't think that was, notwithstanding this reference, I did not believe that was compliant with the CBC in general.
You're not talking about the CBC, you're talking about the CRC.
Ah, okay, all right, the distinction.
Wood foundations are not allowed in the CBC.
Okay,
Yeah. And then the next one is also the same, dealing with seismic issues. The CRC allows you to have a pier foundation system, for lack of a better word, where you could just have piers supporting a building, as opposed to a continuous foundation. So a continuous foundation would be a footing along an entire wall. A pier-type footing would just be a little post here and there. So in our seismic design categories, once again, I would suggest continuous foundations under the buildings.
And that's interior also,
No,
crisscross
exterior.
Total exterior, but what about stem wall interior?
If it's not a bearing wall, it wouldn't need a continuous foundation.
Okay.
in that case, then piers are permissible.
Yeah.
Would be permissible.
Foolish.
The last amendment goes back to the one that we discussed previously with the 27-inch deep footings. Making it consistent with the building code. So those were my recommendations for code amendments. Other than what we discussed on the roofing material, did you have any suggested?
Excuse me, is the table 1809.7 subsection 1, does CRC R403.1, the suggested provision?
It's the same table.
To adopt the same table, because I don't
Yeah.
see that referenced in this.
It's the
Okay.
same table.
Okay, all right.
Renee, going back to the item on page 4, the last one, the depth of the footings, you said that this was about the slabs and the integrity of the slabs. Is there a way to know or to find out or to research whether we do indeed have an issue here?
I would think that you would have heard about it. Maybe you in the construction business, or you in the insurance
we
business.
have entire tracts of homes where we've had slab failure simply because of the expansive soil.
In Ojai?
No, in California, but you hear about it. It's
There's-
not an issue here.
You've got several conditions, especially in older tracks that were built before the widespread use by developers of soils engineers to develop pads for homes that are based on engineered soil. It's over excavated, it's recompacted with a material and water ratio that produces a consistent uniformity of capacity of supporting the structure that's proposed. The issue in the past, and there's several tracks in Ventura, and I've seen signs of it locally back in the day when they were built, which may have been 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago kind of range. where a home was sited on a pad for that lot that was half native and half fill. The fill may have been more or less engineered based on techniques that were done at the time. It has a differential coefficient of expansion or settlement than the native soil, and as a consequence, the slab cracked, the foundation may have cracked, and there are tracts, Cañada Larga tract has a very high percentage of slab, I don't know if they call them failures. I think it could be described that way. That sounds pretty terminal, and I guess it is. But they have, I've seen several of those, and huge, substantial in the garage, and then of course it exists sometimes under carpet in the rest of the home, and was a product of that process at that time. We try to avoid doing that. I think even thoughtful builders today try to
Yeah, and
avoid that.
I don't know that 27-inch deep footings would help a cut-fill slab
yeah.
differential in the dirt.
It
I'm
would
not sure that would
typically
help
because
that.
of the substantial differential in,
Okay, yeah.
so.
Okay.
Okay.
Did anybody have any amendments that you wish to propose?
Yes. We have a very large, we've gone from 2 lots in the city that are designated flood 10, 15 years ago to,
No,
The
I'm talking
last-
building code amendments.
well, yeah, building code amendments. We have kind of a conflict with how we build homes in a flood zone. They're raised. And what we do is we put the airflow, I don't know if you know this or not, FEMA requires 1 inch per BFE. That's the first floor on an elevated 1-to-1, or there's a 50% surcharge. It would almost be kinder if we would adopt the FEMA code for flood, designated flood for elevated. Because if you don't have that airspace between, on the 16-inch centers, if you don't have the square inches, 1 inch per 1 square foot on that first floor, you know, their insurance rate goes from $2,000 to $3,000 a year.
Okay, I'll look at it.
Okay, it's just kind to do it that way and let people know.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay, anything else? Any other comments? No? Okay, then this meeting is adjourned.
Comments?
Are you going to reschedule an additional meeting for the
other
agenda items?
Yeah, we want to do that as quickly as possible.
It won't be 3 weeks. I will be out of town.
Okay.
So I'll try to get one, I come back probably May 2nd or 3rd. I'm not sure
Do you
when.
think 1 or 2 of these would be beneficial?